the meeting's called to order, and before diving into meeting Kimberly, let's just get the minutes out of the way. So there were some draft minutes in the meeting packet from the December 16th meeting. Hopefully people have had a chance to review those, and I would entertain a motion to approve if someone was willing to put one forward.
So moved.
And could we have a second for discussion?
Second.
Great, thank you, Giannis. Is there any discussion on the minutes as they're currently presented? All right, all in favor of approving as written? Aye. Garth kind of blanked out there, but let's say it was unanimous. I think that we all, let's go with that. Great, thank you, everybody. All right, so my colleague Kimberly from the FERCOG has joined us. She will be kind of stepping into the role that Alyssa was doing with this committee to just provide some technical assistance and put a little time into assisting us with the plan development. Kimberly is the program manager of land use overall and might not be with us for the long haul. As we do some additional hiring at the COG, it's possible that we would see somebody else kind of in the longer term, but she will be with us for the foreseeable future. So Kimberly, welcome. I could give you a minute just to kind of say hello and see if there's anything that you want to say, but then maybe it would make sense for us to just go around and say who we are and kind of what's our affiliation on the board.
Sure, that would be great. I did notice in the minutes from the last meeting that there were some yellow highlighted things that had my name attached to them. So I guess that's what happens when you don't attend a meeting, right?
Right.
So anyway, I'm happy to be filling in after Alyssa's departure, and I know that you're all probably really missing her because she was doing great work for you all. So I'm hoping to fill in the gap for the next month or two. We are looking to hire someone to fill Alyssa's position, and that person would take over this work, but there would be a transition period. So in the meantime, I'm available to help you, and I will try my best to come up to speed. Christian, thank you for the information that you've sent to kind of help me get a sense of all the work that's been completed to date. I have to confess I'm still coming up to speed, but I am happy to be helping. Years ago, a couple of years after the CPA was passed, when I was living in Royalston, which is just over the border in Worcester County, right next door to Warwick, I was on the planning board there and worked to help pass the CPA in town, and then served on the CPC committee. So I'm brushing off those dusty skills and hope that maybe I can and use them to help you along. You guys seem to be doing a great job though, so I look forward to working with you, even if it's only going to be short term.
Thanks, Kimberly. I have to confess that I have been on top of reading through the minutes, and I looked at the draft plan, but I'm still kind of feeling a little like I don't feel entirely on top of where we're at with the current draft plan, and it might make sense for me, you, and Christian to schedule a time to meet separate from the larger group to really dive into like where are we at, what can we ask from you. I mean, we'll discuss that some tonight, but I appreciate that you might feel like the need for a little bit more briefing, and frankly, I validate that, and I'm with you.
Thank
I feel
you.
like I could use the same, so maybe we can make that happen beyond just this meeting.
Yeah, that would be great.
And kind of help move that work forward. I think it might be nice for Kimberly just to have a sense of who we are. So my thinking was that we could just kind of say, what our name is, the affiliation, or what landed us onto the CPC. I guess if folks had any kind of particular interest items or whatever that they wanted to communicate, they could do that as well. For the sake of managing an online meeting, I think what I'll do is just kind of call on people. I don't know if we're all seeing the same order as what I'm seeing. So I'll just start and call on people and move our way through. Kimberly and I know each other by virtue of the fact that I too work at the FERCOG. My role is not really in the land use or natural resources department, though I'm a big fan. So my name is Mark. I sit on the Greenfield Planning Board and I'm the planning board designee. I chair this committee by virtue of the fact that I chaired the very first meeting when we were forming, and that's all it takes. And boom, you're in it. So, yeah, that's me. And Travis, you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Travis Drury. I am on the Greenfield Conservation Commission, and I'm actually the chair of the Conservation Commission since July last year. So I was appointed to be the representative from that body.
Great. Thank you, Travis. Christian, you and Kimberly already know each other, but just for the sake of consistency, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yep, Christian O'Plant. I'm the staff contact for the committee. I work in the Greenfield Economic Development Office.
Great. Thank you, Christian. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Wargaftic. I am an at-large member. And I think the reason that I was asked to be on this committee is both my work with developing the skate park, which is now happening, yay, and with and I've been working on housing.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Next we have Wisty.
Wisty Rohrabacher. I am an at-large person, and I'm most interested in getting people from the community to volunteer on different projects. And as it happens, the projects that I have mostly been involved in have to do with creating just routes or working on some of the public gardens that are around. Yeah, so that's it.
Thanks, Wisty.
Sure.
Next we have Giannis.
Yeah, Giannis Jabani. I'm also a member at large, appointed by the mayor. I very recently moved to Greenfield from Boston during the pandemic and was looking for opportunities just to get involved and see how the sausage is made. And talked to the mayor, and she connected me with this community. So this committee. So now I'm part of it.
Thanks, Giannis. And Garth, how are we doing with connectivity? Are you able to hear and be heard? I'm going to venture a guess that yes, you are able to hear because I see that you're trying to speak, but I'm sad to report that you are still not able to be heard. So that's that. There's a problem there to resolve, I guess, Garth. If nothing else, though, we have we have 6 people present, which means that even if Garth has to drop off or sign back on, we would still have a quorum. So Garth, feel free if you need to kind of muck around a little with your connectivity. Great, yeah, I can see the thumbs up. You know, so if need be, I just recently came up with a planning board meeting that apparently like chat windows are not entirely in sync with open meeting law, which was news to me. But if you want to just kind of go with thumbs up or whatnot, Garth, the reality is we could vote, and even if you're voting through a chat modality, it wouldn't matter. So if you're good just hearing us but being silenced, more power to you. And if you need to just jump off and come back on, that's fine too, whatever works best. So Kimberly, that's the group with a few other folks who are absent, and you'll have the chance to meet them next month. Welcome, and we're excited to have you with us.
Thank you.
All right. CPC timeline review. So quite some time back, I had committed to trying to tease out what the months had in order. Susan and Wisty took it upon themselves to kind of nudge me along on that, which I'm very appreciative for. Thank you all for taking the initiative. You know, there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that we're going to find that there is some work to be done between meetings. Great, thank you, guys. And so I appreciate the sense that we really do need to start getting some ducks in a row and kind of taking a slightly longer term vision. Based on some of the suggestions they had, I did start to draft out a timeline and Christian, do I have rights to share a screen? Can I just show people briefly?
Yeah, it's the share button down in the bottom middle. Looks like it is.
Okay. Are you all able to
Let's
see a
see
Word
that.
document in a table?
Yep.
Yep.
I mean, I don't expect you to be able to read every single bullet point, but just so you have a sense of what I'm working on. I had actually, last week, I got in touch with Stu from the coalition and had said, like, you know, if I get this to you by the beginning of the week, could you turn around some feedback to me prior to the meeting, and he thought he could, but I haven't heard back yet. And so I was kind of wanting to get that from him before I sent this to Christian to share with the entire group. So this is still extremely drafty, and I would expect that Stu would be able to offer a little bit of nuance to some of this. But what I basically have set up here is within each month, I dropped in some of what we were thinking our activities as a committee would be. And then based on that, what were some of the what would need to be on meeting agendas in order to move those activities along. So what I'm hoping we could do is just kick this down the road. I would expect to hear back from Stu next week. He's very responsive. And I could get this to Christian to then post to the shared drive. We can all be taking a look at that and adding some different bullet points or whatnot. And that way, when we came together in February, we'd really be able to have kind of a fleshed out plan for this calendar year. I think the two highlights that I would want to point out to this group is one, there was some thinking that this spring we would want to be doing some of those public hearings and outreach meetings, and those would make sense to discuss in terms of, I think there would be the bare minimum of just doing a public hearing, but we could go a little bit beyond that and kind of having more than one. The minimum is that we have to have one public hearing, but I think that Sue and Wisty's recommendation, or perhaps this was the larger group in discussion at the last meeting, had been thinking that the ideal would be to do two in two different locations. Let me just kind of pause there and see if anyone has anything to say about that, since I did miss some discussion, and this may have already been fleshed out by this group a bit at the last meeting.
I don't remember specifically talking about doing two in different locations, but I'm open to that. I remember what we had discussed, and Tom had drafted the letter, was basically sending a notice out to all the different departments that we listed out, saying we're happy to talk to you. If you want to take us up on it, please reach out.
Yep. And that letter did go out, and it was a March 1st deadline to hear from any boards or commissions that had thoughts or concerns or wanted to be engaging with us. So then this might have been more just a suggestion from Susan around the notion of doing a couple of meetings like out in the community. And I think that those could be the public hearings as well, or we could hold a kind of formal public hearing like this, and I think just do a couple of more like education events. I kind of wonder if that's work that this entire committee needs to plan for during this meeting, or if it might be possible to consider a small group forming to discuss what that might look like. If there was any interest in a subcommittee forming to talk about community engagement, public outreach, what that might look like, what materials might be needed. Is there any interest from folks around taking that on or being a part of that?
Yeah.
Susan and Wisty, both interested?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind joining as well.
Okay.
That'd be great. Christian, can you make note of Susan, Wisty, and Giannis's interest? I would jump on that committee if it was helpful, or at least attend, an initial video conference or whatnot to see how I could be of use as well for that group. Yes, Wisty.
Just before you move away from that, would you clarify again what you're thinking the committee would do?
Well, the bare minimum that we need to do is hold a public hearing, which could just be this committee convening and having space during a meeting where we're open to the public to kind of hear that we would kind of be like, this is our plan thus far. These are some of our priorities. These are some of the priorities identified within these other plans. What do you think? What are we missing? Like, what other work should be factored into the development of a community preservation plan for Greenfield? So I do think that it requires, there's a public hearing, but to me, it would seem that there would need to be a little bit of a presentation or education component first of even, this is what this committee does. This is what could be done with money like this. This is what the priorities are looking like thus far. And then kind of opening up a public hearing to hear some comments around what people think. I think that could indeed include department heads above and beyond any feedback that they sent formally to Christian. They could attend that meeting and speak during a public hearing. But the feeling that I've gotten over, over the past 6 months that we've been doing this work is that people would also really value not necessarily just like that legally required government meeting, but to actually kind of get out into the community and speak to people in the real world in a real way as well. And so that's where I was thinking that some subcommittee work might be helpful, just in terms of what does that look like, or what does that require for people to feel informed. When Christian and Tom pushed out the notification to all the department heads, they sent, I believe, both Stu's PowerPoint presentation and Alyssa's. There was a couple of Community Preservation Act 101 slide decks that went out. But I think that just even that of what kind of engagement do we want from the community? What needs to be offered out in order for the community at large to participate in this in a meaningful way? The bare minimum for us, Wisty, would just be to have an open meeting that's posted publicly and advertised at a minimum of 2 weeks preceding that meeting in a local newspaper. That would be the bare minimum. So we could just do something at John's On, run the ad in the paper saying that on this night we'll be holding a public hearing on the community preservation plan for the city of Greenfield. We would open it up, people would say what they wanted to say, and we'd thank them and move on with our business. But that's what I'm saying is I think that there's probably a desire with this group to do a little more than that bare minimum. So what does that little more look like? And what does it take from us to be ready to do that? I think the suggestion that you all had was to start looking at holding some of those meetings in April, which I think is fine, with the caveat of where are we at with our draft plan, and is that enough time to develop any other educational materials that we need? And so while I'd be completely open to it happening in April, I would also think that it might be that it's something that happens perhaps in the later spring, depending on where we go. So for the time being, I think for right now, if we could just get these three on a committee and start batting around some ideas of what would the goals be around community engagement, and what would the materials be that are needed. So we can offline maybe schedule another meeting. Or Christian, I'm a little unclear of if it's an actual subcommittee that's being formed, could we communicate via email if it's all kind of CCing you?
If it's an official subcommittee, open meeting law gets really weird. Like if it's the three of you and then Susan and Wisty, or Wisty and Giannis, just the two of them want to talk to each other, that would technically be violating open meeting law. So subcommittees get really wonky really quick. So just as a
If
heads
there's
up.
a workaround around kind of work groups or research groups that would be less formal than a subcommittee, where we could indeed just have some conversations without having to go through the city and post them publicly and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I've had other committees where people just decided to work together outside of the meeting. It wasn't an official subcommittee. And so I think that's okay, as far as I know.
Okay.
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 I have access to Zoom, so I could send out a doodle to Giannis and to Wisty, and we can make it to happen that way.
Good. Let's do that. So we're not going to formally appoint a subcommittee, but a few interested parties are going to do a little bit of research to bring back to the larger group. Susan, if you wouldn't mind including me on the doodle, I wouldn't mind being a part of the initial conversation, and we'll just kind of see what the frequency of those meetings is. But I'd like to at least kind of be with you to start the ball rolling.
Yep. No
Great.
problem.
Thank you. There was some thinking that the goal would be to try to present the community preservation plan to the city council in June. And in my timeline, one of the things that I made note of is that the June meeting is also the passage of the budget. It's a really long, really burly meeting. It's where everybody's heads are going to be at. I know that the July meetings can also be a little dodgy because you have lots more people on vacation and whatnot. It's certainly something that would need to happen in the summer. But again, I think a lot of this is just contingent on how quickly can we develop a draft plan this spring. So that's something to be aware of. And I think the other piece that Susan thought it was important that we also be thinking about preliminary applications coming in the fall. And that, again, it might be that there's a smaller subgroup, if not a formal committee, some interested parties who might be willing to do some of that application work and the pre-screening work prior to bringing recommendations to the full committee. And that is something that might be a little more labor intensive depending on the volume of applications that come in. And so we were thinking that it would just be good to have that on people's radar now, that in September, October, if folks are interested in really being kind of one of the first to look at some of those pre-applications, that's something that could take some time and might want to be on people's radar. I don't think that we need to assign people to that tonight, but I think that it would be good for that to just be in people's heads, that we would be looking at a little bit more of kind of a publicity push, finalizing and presenting that plan in the late spring into summer. I think it's safe to say that we would see a little bit of a lull, and larger activity in July and August. But then as we then moved into fall, we would be looking at starting that application process. This is all a rough outline. Again, I'm waiting to hear from Stuart around any feedback that he has to keep things realistic or any context that he might have based on working with so many other committees. So as soon as I get any kind of feedback back from him, I'll flesh this out and send it all to you all for further comment. So Stu's usually pretty responsive. I would anticipate receiving this in the shared drive within the next week. And I would encourage you all to just kind of populate it as well. And we can really try to build out a more formal timeline, or a final timeline rather, at that next meeting. Giannis, I see that your hand's up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, high level, I really like this timeline. This is extremely helpful to start having some more visibility and like pre-planning things that need to happen many months down the line. Very specifically about like the assigning people to review the preliminary applications. I mean, if we make the deadline for submitting them the day before we meet as a committee, we'll have a really good sense for how many there are, and then we can just decide how to split them up.
Yeah, that's a good point, and just kind of know from there what that workload looks like. Yeah. And so I think that for right now, just that high level kind of, think about your own availability and what your life looks like kind of in the late spring, in the early fall, and to what extent can you invest above and beyond just these monthly meetings.
Right.
Garth, how's it going? Are you actually fully with us?
I believe so.
Hey.
I managed to get it on the iPhone thing versus the Android. So there you go.
Fantastic.
So yeah, on the applications stuff coming in, I also like the timeline. It occurs to me that a number of us, and I think I might even be one of them, we're on like a 1-year appointment. So I don't know exactly what the cycle is for that, or if there's if there's other people coming on, or if it's sort of assumed that this anybody who was on for 1 year and has been on this far will probably be reappointed for another 1-year term, because aren't some of the people on for 1 year, some people on for 2, some people on for 3?
Yes. And I
right.
thought this was on the agenda. And as I look at the agenda, I'm realizing that some of what we've been talking about, I had put under other business, but then it was just like, well, it's part of the timeline review. So the good news is that we've already accomplished a good chunk of the other business. Yes, Garth, it's myself and Wisty and Barb, whose terms will expire in July. And so we are already kind of tucking that away. I brought that to the planning board's attention and indicated that I'd be willing to continue serving if that was a fit for the planning board. Barb is not really available to get into this stuff right now, but I will touch base with her around talking with the rec commission as well. Just with that thinking that we want to have those appointments made so that we can just kind of have that seamless transition and participation in July. Wisty, I'm assuming that you're willing to do another at-large term and kind of put yourself up to consideration for the mayor. Is that a fair assumption to make?
It is. What I don't know is if it's at large, is it like another 1-year one, or is it a 3-year? How does that work?
I'm pretty sure that these are all 2-year terms that are staggered.
Okay.
But we can follow up with Caitlin in the mayor's office to just confirm, well, what would this next one be? But I think that it would then be it would be a 2-year term moving forward. Christian, do you know the answer? I see your hands up.
I thought it was 3 years because a lot of the committees are 3 years, and it looks like it is because the farthest one out are like Giannis and Travis, and they are 2024. So that was, and they got put in 2021. So it seems like it's 3 years.
Boy, I'll tell you, when I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'd do another term, I wasn't thinking 3 years. But then again, this is, what are you going to do? Like, I just got a little tired. It's like 3 years. Oh.
You can do it, Mark. You can do
You
it.
can't leave, so
Yeah, I know, and Susan had made the point that now would be a great time for some consistency. That we're already learning so much, and so to kind of onboard some brand new people, it's not the end of the world. But I think that in the ideal, we would all just stick with this for a while and gain a little more experience together, and just become a more adept committee. So, so
If possible, I would like to have a set month that each year we we check in with people so we know here's when people make a decision, blah, blah, blah. So if that could somehow be written in a permanent way on that schedule, that'd be cool.
Okay, and that it is currently in there to allow for that seamless transition. And I guess, right, maybe this kind of becomes more of a template, not even for calendar year 22, but just like this is the seasonal flow of the work of a community preservation committee. So some of our specific tasks might not look the same every year, but we would really start to have that sense of it's roughly around this meeting that we would need to be thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So Wisty, if you wouldn't mind getting in touch directly with Caitlin at the mayor's office just to indicate that your term is ending and that you and the committee would like you to be reappointed, that would be great. And if you need assistance contacting Caitlin or whatnot, I'm happy to help. But I would think it's probably pretty easy to find her information on the city website. And you can get the ball rolling there. I have nudged the planning board. I think it's the next month they'll discuss that and decide whether or not to reappoint me. Pretty sure they will. So we'll do that same thing and really try to get that pushed through the mayor's office sooner rather than later. And in the next couple of weeks, as Barb's a little more available, I'll touch base with her around talking with the rec committee as well. I don't know where Barb's at in terms of her willingness or ability to commit to another term. But even if out of the three of us, if two of us are, that's some good continuity. So fingers crossed that Barb would be willing to do the same.
Okay.
So yes, Garth. So it is kind of built into the timeline, and we're specifically aware of what needs to be happening this spring to allow us to be able to just continue voting and moving forward in July. So that's that. Is that sufficient? Oh, Susan, yes.
This is just quick. I just want to say, whenever you get to the next question, I would like to just make a comment on something that was in the minutes, just so Christian has the information. But we don't have to. So whenever you're ready on that, before we go to the next discussion.
Cool. Yeah, and so I think I would be comfortable wrapping up the timeline review. I realize that it's hard to see that entire table on the shared screen and whatnot. I will get that out soon. I just felt like it made more sense to be hearing from Stu, and I thought that I would be able to turn it around with his feedback sooner than I was able to, which I know is kind of a pattern with me submitting documents to this group. Sorry. But I will get that posted as soon as possible into the shared drive, and then we can all start populating that a little bit further. If folks have comments or questions, I think you just have to kind of make that point of sending them to Christian. Christian will then send them out to the rest of us, and it's all legal. Is there anything more to say on the timeline in the immediate moment, knowing that we'd be able to do some editing over the next month via Google Docs? Okay. Great. So let's plan for a very robust spring and a robust fall in terms of moving this forward. And we'll move on to the next item of business, which before we actually get on to the very next item of business, let's jump back to Sue and the comment on the minutes.
Okay. In the minutes, there was a section that said that I was going to give you some information about a term that's being used around housing elsewhere. And the term is attainable housing. So it kind of skirts the line between affordable and workforce housing and all of those terms, and makes it that people would be able to attain the housing based on their own needs. So that's the term that that's being thrown around right now. So just so we have that information. Done.
Great. Thank you, Susan. So I guess we can kind of make a point of, including that in the plan, using that in the plan as we're talking about priorities. Good term. It actually, it's pretty inclusive. It makes sense. I feel like that's pretty clear, and that's great.
Thank the people in Nantucket.
Excellent. All right, I'm actually going to kind of continue just with Susan holding the floor. The next piece of business was to touch base around the status of the application as it currently exists in its draft form. Susan, I think you had specifically asked that you wanted to talk a little bit about some review criteria in regards to the point system that Groton was using.
Right. Did everyone have a chance to look at the attachment that that Christian put in around the point system?
Yes.
Wisty and I took it upon ourselves to try to apply that point system to Greenfield. What we're trying to do is come up with a way that's more objective to be able to look at the issues that are before us so that we can then say, okay, this one's a 45, this one's a 25. It looks like we think that the 45 might be something that we want to move forward with. What do we need to know? So that it gives us the basis for making a determination that's not based on, well, I know these people and they're really good. And we need to get beyond that. Wisty, do you want to say anything more about that discussion or that part of things?
I do just want to say that when we were looking at the Groton information, we simultaneously were looking through our own application to make sure that this was like coordinated with the essence of our application. And so we tried to be really conscientious about that. I've used systems like this for different organizations and in different situations, and they really help the discussion. They just really help the discussion move forward and to be able to evaluate. So, yeah.
I think it also puts I've used this in grading proposals, this kind of thing. And one of the things that's helpful is also it notes where people need more work. So you can go back to folks and say, this is the place where you fell down in terms of the way everybody looked at it, so that we have an average score. We come up with something. We say, okay, so if you get working on this, the next time we run through, you got a better chance, that kind of thing. So it really clarifies what the issues are. So did folks have a chance to look at this? Yes, no, yes? Okay.
Yep.
I don't know if, do you want to walk through it line by line? How do you want to handle dealing with this?
Susan, just as a starting point, I know, so there's one particular highlighted area, because I guess that was my question.
right.
Of like, well, how much feedback are you looking for? Is it really about the highlighted areas? You're like, this is where I want committee feedback. I mean, I get that we all have a voice, but were you kind of feeling like, we're really pleased with this, minus this piece around defining broad and strong? Or are you feeling like you want feedback across the board?
Well, we wanted feedback across the board, but I think if we want to have a discussion tonight and looking at time and such things, if we want to just talk about that question, that would be fine. And then we can go back and look at the whole thing next time, if that makes sense for folks. Is that a way to proceed?
Sure.
What do you think, Wisty?
I would just like to get a sense, like, do people think it's worthwhile enough to proceed with?
Yeah.
Like, is this a thumbs up kind of thing and it seems positive? Should we move ahead with it?
So maybe we should start there. Does this seem like a rational way for us to proceed? Recognizing that it'll probably change once we have some experience with it.
I really liked it. I really appreciate your work at looking at the Groton one and sort of adapting it for Greenfield. Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think it's going to be a learning process. We're going to try to be like, oh, this fits into X, Y, and Z item, but like we don't know how to actually grade it versus that. But some of that is going to be committee when we're meeting and talking about it, and I think that's okay. So even on the one you highlighted about like what is broad and strong, Certainly if we say in our application, like, we need to see, we'd like to see broad and strong, or, projects that have broad and strong support will be rated higher. People may either take it upon themselves to be like, oh, well, I got 400 signatures from my neighbors, or, I held a forum and I got, or, that these 50 people at the meeting tonight here are all here in favor of this project. And we'll sort of see how it goes. Because it feels like it'd be hard to put in something exactly like you have to, I don't want it to be like the question one thing, like, well, you have to have at least 2.5% of the people of the last election, plus or minus the square root of the date. That's
Right. Absolutely. Giannis, you look like you want to talk.
Yeah, high level, I really like this. I love the different categories that focus on inclusivity, cost, support. I have a bunch of detailed thoughts that I'm happy to just provide in writing to you guys via Christian after this. But 2 high level points. The first one was in the very first criteria meets the goals and objectives. It says the current master plan and open space and recreation plan. Is that like within the CPA plan that we're defining? Like, that was what I was picturing, is that it should align with the objectives laid out in our CPA plan.
You're right. That should say CPA plan and not master plan. You're right.
Yeah. And then the second thing is just in how we're thinking about the scoring. Is it that like all of these things would be summed up from 1 to 9, and that would, or 1, 2, and then 1 to 9, or how exactly were you thinking that would work?
We were looking at a 1 to 5, and and that if you look at any of these, it'll say, like overall application quality and urgency of project. 1, no rush, can do it anytime, not a high priority in Greenfield.
Right.
Number 3, sooner the better, a recognized need. 5, once in a generation opportunity to meet a recognized need in a significant way.
Yeah.
So and if somebody wanted to put a 4 in there, I have no problem with that. This is not like, it's just to give some sense of how we approach the question. So I think and we can, we'll total up the numbers and see what they mean.
Yeah, so are you thinking the max score would be like 5 for function and 5 for value, so 10, or would it be 10 for function plus 45 for value? So
I think it's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. So it would be, the function, the 5 for, so the 10 for function, and then 10, 5 for each of the other ones, unless somebody else has another opinion, and we can do that. But that was my thought.
Okay. Yeah, I guess one way that I might think about this, and we could consider it, is like, I like to think of the cost of something, like how much the committee is going to have to, devote to project X versus project Y, as being like in the denominator. And so like if you have something where, we're only providing 5 or 10% of the funding to get the last mile to get this thing shovel ready, like, to me personally, that would be like much more leverage that we can provide as a committee. And so I don't know if this makes it too complicated, but I would almost say like the the value divided by the function is like the score of like the or the where the function being like, if there's a lot of funding, that would drive up the number. So curious what people think about that.
What do folks think?
I think Giannis brings up an interesting point, and it makes me think.
Excuse, I'm sorry. This is, all right, I think that'll stop. Okay, we're sort of stopped.
What happened?
I got a call and it goes through the whole system.
Oh. I think Giannis raises an interesting point, but I guess I was also thinking that to me, this almost seemed like the initial kind of ranking or sorting activity kind of you do with right like funding proposals or like scoring resumes, and that the final number is not necessarily like, well, that's it, they're the top number so they get it, but then it's more like, how does this feel, like if these are kind of if this is the top and this is the bottom and this is the middle, how does this feel, and then you start applying some nuance. And so I almost wonder if the formula that you're talking about, Giannis, is more a piece of that nuance of like, all other things being equal, here's two strong proposals. This one, right, just requires just like a little nudge to make it attainable. This one requires a huge investment. And maybe that kind of moves the needle to these two mid-ranking things. Or I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how to accommodate what you're talking about in terms of that, like value divided by function, but it does seem that that's a level of nuance that should be factored in. I just wonder, is it part of this actual initial numeric ranking, or is that then part of the discussion after assessing this is the spread within the applications? Because I guess then we'd also be assuming that there's such a level of applications that there's more projects than there is funding. And we don't necessarily even know that that would be the case right off the bat. So I feel like both things could be true, that we can use this numeric scoring, but that we could then still be applying a little bit of nuance to that spread.
You know, it might be worthwhile to try it both ways because we can do that. So we look at it as a total score, and then we also take the function number and divide it into the score and see if that makes any difference. It may not make difference, you know, and I think we can try it because this is going to be an experiment all the way around.
Yep.
So let's see.
Yeah.
Let's see. But I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I'm happy to just like draft something up and send it over your way.
Great.
You can
Thank
see
you.
what you think.
Thank you. Other
Yes.
other general questions around this or comments around this piece of work that we did?
I think I have a comment on basically the same question we were just talking about like multiple funding sources. And to me, it seems like if we're ranking them lower, if all of the money comes from Community Preservation Committee, but higher if more money comes from somewhere else, it kind of seems like built into that we would automatically be rating larger projects as higher because they're more likely to have more funding from other sources, whereas like maybe there's some really interesting small projects that we could just fully fund and it'd be easy and like really interesting, but they don't have anywhere else to get the funding. I feel like it might punish those kinds of projects having the scoring the way it is.
That's interesting. I mean, we can, you know, I think that's a good question. Is there another way that we can handle this? Because I think that is an interesting question. It's another way that you think we can think about this, because the fact is that we're going to have a limited amount of money. And so for many projects, it's going to be multiple sources, but we could have something come in that's great, that's a small project and fund the whole thing. So is there another way that we want to handle this, or do we want to knock out the question?
It does seem that like oftentimes those small projects will have significant in kind that I you know, probably not always, but I do feel like, you know, if somebody's applying for like 2,000 to, I don't know, say like the Looky Here community garden thing, right? They're going to be like, and we're going to have, you know, 20 people working for 10 weekends, you know, and that comes out of funding. So it does feel like, you know, that might be covered on that. You know, I think it's worth being one of the factors that we look at. You know, I think kind of regardless, not entirely regardless of but in addition to all the scoring, right? We're going to be meeting and going over, these things. And I think this doesn't have to be perfect. Like we sort of discuss it and be like, oh yeah, it didn't quite hit 55555 on these, but here's why. You know, some of us feel it's a good project, and maybe some people are like, not really, or it's not better than X, Y, and Z project. Then we have that discussion, and that's sort of the important work that we're doing, is sort of figuring out what is best for Greenfield and how to spend those CPA funds.
So do you want to leave this right now the way it is, and then we'll figure out whether it works or not? Misty?
Well, this is kind of premature to bring up, but one thing it makes me think is that I would like to write into our calendar that we will evaluate the process, because like you're saying, over time, this is going to change and we'll be learning over time. So
Good
if
idea.
we can evaluate, all right, how did it work? What was good? What do we want to do for next time? I think if we got into that format of evaluating what it is we've done and make adjustments, I would like to build that in around almost everything.
Good idea.
Thank you, Wisty. That's a really good point. I'll make note of that and add that in and write it. I don't think that that's necessarily even an annual review. That's like at various milestones to do some debriefing and lessons learned to inform the next cycle. Makes total sense.
Very good.
Thank you. Susan, could I jump in for a second on this regarding the funding
Absolutely. Go
sources?
for it. Go for it.
I'm not married to it being in there. I'm not sure that I do see the immediate value added from it. I don't have a problem with it being in there, but yeah, now that Travis is raising the question, I'm just kind of like, do we need it? I do almost think that in terms of function, like where you've got the goals and objectives, like, is this something is this a documented need already or not, is helpful. One of the things that I noticed in other plans or applications was kind of layering of multiple goals of like, this is something that addresses both housing and open space. And so we're going to credit this a little higher because it's meeting multiple CPA priorities. And so I'm almost kind of like, is that in terms of function, or maybe this is actually value, not function. But I'm wondering if that piece is missing, of like, this actually speaks to multiple priorities in the plan, not one. And therefore, we're going to weight this a little bit higher because the sum total of this project moves the needle forward in multiple ways.
I think that's a good idea.
So that might be something to consider playing around with.
Okay.
If it works, and it's just something to think about. And the funding source piece, I'm not tied to. If other people felt like, what, let's pull it, we could. I do also hear Garth's point of like, this is not the end all be all. We could try it. And if we're just like, what, this is not working within all of this scoring, then we'll pull it from every single one. And so be it.
How about if we make it bonus points? That instead of being part of the initial criteria, it becomes a bonus. So if someone's got multiple funding sources or has a large number of people who are doing volunteer work or something like that, they get an extra 2 points, something like that. So rather than, and so that if they meet any of those criteria, they get an extra couple of points, but we're not going to make it part of the system. Does that work for folks? What do you think?
I think to me it kind of seems the same either way. Like either way, it's going to add to the points, And I think like as we've talked about this more, and especially Garth talking about the smaller projects having in kind, it does kind of make me think that it's easier for smaller projects to have in-kind donations be a larger percentage of the project because, like you said, if you have 20 people working and, say minimum wage for the number of hours that they're doing, like that can add up to a lot of money, in kind.
Right.
So now that we've like discussed it more, I'm less against it than I was initially. So I would be fine just leaving it how it is, and then like Wisty said, we can reevaluate, see if it is biasing it in one way or another, and go from there.
Okay, Giannis?
Yeah, I was going to say the other option is that we just have like basically separate stacks of small community-led projects and larger city-led projects, and we just look at them as different things entirely.
do
But
that.
I'm also happy to just like do some thinking about this and maybe try to think of a way to that both of those would individually score highly and be considered by the committee.
We certainly could do that and still use the same point system within the
Yeah.
within the grouping. That could work as well. We don't have to make the decision tonight. But it's worth thinking about.
Right, you sort of have like the 0 to 5,000 or 10,000 project, and you have the 50,000 to $4 million project or something like that.
Right. So we could do that.
Folks, I just want to point out that it is 6:30 right now. We do still have, in terms of talking about the timeline, there were some questions around parameters for city department applications. We do need to touch base with Kimberly on the draft of the preservation plan. I think most of what was in the other business kind of got wrapped into the timeline piece. So I'm happy to keep talking about this, but I just want to check in with the group that we usually do a hard stop at 7 and we've got about a half hour left. So where would we like to go with this?
My feeling is we've got enough here to work with, and then we can come back next time.
Perfect.
Wisty, do you think so too? Yeah. Okay. Then we're done.
You can kind of just send your thoughts to Christian and Susan and Wisty, or to Christian, and he'll get it out to the right people. You'll continue to just work with that application checklist, and we'll revisit it.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, guys. Hey, I just want to point out too, because Susan used the language of like that they took it upon themselves earlier in the meeting. I made some reference to Susan and Wissy taking things upon themselves. I just want to clarify that people taking things upon themselves is fantastic. So if there's any, if there was any sense of like that was somehow being seen as presumptuous or whatnot, we should all take as many things upon ourselves as we're willing and able to do between meetings. Love it. So that's the tone behind taking things on yourself. Just clarifying. So Susan, actually, I don't know that this was Susan's recommendation. I think this might have come from Tom, who's not even with us tonight, but talking about some kind of limits and parameters around city department applications. Can anybody offer some context around what that conversation was at the last meeting? And
yeah, I think I can. What Tom was concerned about is that because city departments often have other resources beyond the CPA money, that they need to prove that they've kind of gone through their other sources, and they're still short $5,000 because of all these other things. And so that should be a requirement of any city department coming in for CPA money. Does that seem accurate to other people?
sure sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. So as we continue kind of fleshing out the application, we can factor that in. I don't know that it merits a ton more discussion tonight, just by virtue of I do want to make sure that we have a little time to talk with Kimberly about the plan that itself. But let's flesh that out a little. And Christian, along those same lines, I kind of had a note that if we were to see a ton of interest or kind of applications from multiple city departments, my concern is that it would be the onus of this committee to somehow herd a bunch of governmental cats. And it kind of feels to me like the mayor's office, you're in MJ's office, there must be somebody in the city government themselves who would need to do a little bit of that coordinating, because we shouldn't have to be bouncing back and forth between multiple city departments if they have almost kind of like competing applications. Or maybe this is something to kind of just flesh out with Stu or other committees that have done this work in the state. But I just feel like it could take a lot of our time to be kind of like an intermediary between multiple government applications, and then find out, oh, the mayor's office didn't even know that the rec department had submitted this, and blah, 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 blah. So I just want us to be thinking about that on some level, like the city needs to pull its shit together. If a bunch of different boards or departments are applying, who's the centralizing body within the city that knows what's going on? I don't feel like it should be us. So that's a thought for us to kind of flesh out as well. But I just am a little nervous that we could be caught in a bunch of like city department crosshairs, and I'm not into it. I'm not willing to do it. So we're volunteers.
Yeah.
We'll go back to that in the future as well. Okay, so That brings us to the review of the community preservation plan draft as it currently stands and next steps. And Kimberly, I know that you said that you felt like you did still need a little more time to catch up with this. And again, like I missed a couple of meetings and have looked through some of Alyssa's work. But I too am kind of like, what are the next steps? So committee, can you help me and Kimberly understand kind of where we're at and what the next steps are? Anyone?
I think the main next step was to include the historic preservation as a section because that's still missing.
Well, I thought that there was something also. Was there not a deadline around kind of submitting some feedback to Christian? Like, Christian, have you received any kind of further requests or edits or thoughts from folks since the last meeting?
I think like Susan and Wisty had a few things alongside all their other stuff, but there hasn't been a lot from anyone else yet.
Okay. All right. John is working. John, when he emailed me saying that he was not able to attend tonight, he did indicate that he was working on some of the historic preservation stuff with Margot Jones. And so that is on his radar, and he is doing some of that work. So I can give that update. And Christian, yeah.
I did make like a template for the historical preservation section and kind of put in the boilerplate stuff. So that is in the drive alongside where the regular plan is. But I'm sure John or whoever actually works on that section and Kimberly can change that as much as they want.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, Wisty.
I'm concerned that the materials, collectively, they're really laborious to get through. And I hope there's something that we can do to kind of summarize the stuff so that for just people who are out there and they're interested, I don't want them to get turned off by such a volume of reading material. And I'm not sure what to do about that, but.
Well, Wisty, I think it's a hugely valid point. Like as a planner and as a bit of a geek and a reader, I am a fan of a big dense plan with lots of documentation and tables and charts and just like all the information you could possibly want. And I hear your point that that's not how everybody consumes information. And I think that it's certainly possible within the community preservation plan to build out some executive summaries, to build out some down and dirty kind of just like graphic, this is what's in this plan, this is what our processes look like. I mean, I think that that can be a part of the plan. To me, I do think that that's what I feel like how you communicate the whole of this dense plan comes after the dense plan is pretty much written and in place, because it's almost like then you've got the full roadmap and now you can start making the infographics or the executive summaries that tell the story of that much more in-depth roadmap. So okay. I think we can do both. I hear what you're saying. It's a great deal of text. It's a lot of lists and tables and footnotes. And I love it, but that's just me. And there's a lot of people who'd be like, hell no, I am not reading this. Forget it. And so I do think that we can do both. And I don't, I think that this committee could probably take a hand in that as well once we actually get the plan fleshed out. Kimberly, can you refresh my memory? Does this committee get FERCOG technical assistance for the first year, or does it go beyond that? I can't remember from when we first started talking with Alyssa last summer, but for some reason I feel like it's in my head that we get a year.
That sounds right, but I can check in with Phoebe about that because she's the grant, administrator.
Yeah. Okay. So that's something to think about. But Wisty, I almost wonder, and does that tie in with this notion of if there is a desire for this group to do some direct community outreach and education about the CPA, the work of this committee, the priorities of the current plan? That's what I'm kind of wondering of, even if the plan's not completely finished, do we need some materials like, do our CPA 101 slide decks in PDF form speak for themselves enough, or do we need something that's still a little bit more explicit and consumable? So I think that we'll have to be talking about kind of like public facing materials the whole way through. I mean, the full plan in its final form for the year is certainly a public facing material. but I think it's the nerd version, and you just want the down and dirty version, and I think that we can build out both.
Yeah, good.
Yep.
Yeah, I would think if we could make a 1 to 2 pager that just had like highlights. This is what the CPA, this is the money, these are the sort of projects we can fund. Here's where the public hearing, here's when applications are, here's when awards happen. Right.
Yep.
And if that's out there, and then people can, and that sort of gets it out to everyone, and then people want to dig in more and be like, oh, I'm interested in applying for something, how do I actually do that? And they can get into more of the details and what the scoring looks like, and do they match up with plans and all that.
And ultimately, we will walk away with priorities. I mean, the plan won't just be a listing of all of the different needs identified and all these other plans that we've reviewed. We as a committee will have some priorities for the funding cycle that we're particularly interested in. I think that's something that we'll need to really clearly communicate within this much larger plan that has all this context and background. Like right now, the types of things that we're looking to fund are, boom, these are our priorities for the year. And maybe a bunch of those priorities would just be some of the things already kind of identified in other plans, but there's a lot of them out there. And so we're still going to need to somehow take all of those and say, this is what's most important to us right now. I mean, that's the point of the public hearing and that community outreach, right? Is to help shape what are our priorities for this funding cycle as a committee. And so that information, I think, needs to be really accessible and consumable too, and not buried within, a 75-page plan. So we'll get there, Wisty, but I think the point is well made. Yeah. Is there much more to even discuss about that? I mean, I know that this is the next big thing that we need to be working on is, both this application and this plan. But it seems like maybe we need to give Kimberly a little time to kind of take a closer look at it. Kimberly, I can commit to taking a slightly deeper dive into this as well, and would be willing to take on some work on my personal time, not FERCog time. The fact that I work at the FERCog has nothing to do with the Community Preservation Act or committee. But I'd be happy
Is
to work
that your
with you somehow.
disclaimer?
I know exactly, right? It sounded like the end of a lawyer commercial or something.
Right.
I do have, so even before we have those public discussions, it seems like we need to be able to tell people there's a public discussion coming up in 2 weeks. And if before this discussion comes up, you could go here to get some information. Because if they don't have any information, it really changes how the public discussion is. So somehow we need to have some stuff to make available to people even before that public discussion.
Right.
The first one.
I agree.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what I was meaning when I was saying, do we need like some educational materials or outreach materials, Wisty? Because there's the whole this is the Community Preservation Act, this is the Community Preservation Committee, but there's also, this is our process and these are our priorities thus far. It'd be disingenuous to just be like, well, what do you want? Out of anything, what do you want? Like the reality is we've already done some work and identified some areas, and there are indeed some topic areas that we're focused on. So it would make sense to provide people with some of those boundaries of within these constraints, what have we not identified? What's missing? And so how do we educate people on both that process and the priorities that we've identified thus far?
Okay, we just have to meet tomorrow.
Yeah. So we're at the end of January now. And again, that's where there's a piece of me. It's like, can we pull all of this together by April? I mean, I think that the plan is in relatively good shape, and over the next month, if we can get it closer to, I mean, it might not be in final form, but if we can get to a point of this is reflective of the needs identified in our priorities thus far, then I think we could start turning our eyes towards how do we tease this out into something really consumable and plan for some of that outreach in those public hearings. I mean, it might be ambitious, and I don't know. It might be that we still need another month before we can really move through the plan and get to that point where this committee has identified some preliminary priorities for the community to respond to.
Okay.
And this is what I'm saying of this whole notion of taking it upon yourself. I mean, it's a lot of work to try to just do as one big collective during these 90 minutes every month.
Yeah.
So I can certainly commit to diving deeper into this plan before the next meeting and trying to work with Kimberly and Christian to really kind of make sure that any further feedback is in place so that we have something to present out at the next meeting and kind of say, this is a good preliminary start, with the understanding that there would then be public hearings and outreach to present that out and get some feedback back to refine priorities for the upcoming funding cycle. So if anybody, Christian said he did get a little bit of feedback. If anybody feels like it would be to their advantage or to the committee's advantage to just dive deeper into that draft this month as well, it would be an opportune time to do so. Now that we have Kimberly on board and able to do a little bit of work for us as well, let's take advantage of it.
Mark, I just wanted to
Yes.
add that two meetings ago, the first one that you missed, we kind of in the meeting we kind of went through some of those sections like line by line, and we were like editing wording and like, oh, this idea is not good. So we have done a little bit of that as a group, but I mean, definitely it's good for everyone to look at it again. But just thought I would let you know that.
No, I mean, I had a sense that you guys had gone through it and that we're already seeing kind of a revised draft. And so, I mean, no way trying to imply that like work hasn't been happening at all. But I guess it's more just even that, like, I think that it's, as we've just been kind of like forming and learning all this, it's felt a little bit more amorphous. And I think we are actually now starting to kind of come up on some actual goals and deadlines. So I completely respect that work has been done on this. And I thank you guys for the time that you've put into it. So Kimberly and I will put some time into it this month as well. And yeah, maybe it is very reasonable that by next month we could just have a draft that, again, it's the draft of the plan prior to doing some community engagement and outreach. But this is where we're at, and we're happy with the product. So maybe we really could just be in that place by the February meeting, which would be great. That'd be a really good timeline. Okay, it's 6:45. So Kimberly, this is you don't have like immediate marching orders beyond just if you could, familiarize yourself a little more with the plan. I think that I could be of use to you. Again, I won't be billing the cog for this time, but I have pretty close access to Kimberly, and we might be able to get some of this done relatively quickly.
That sounds good.
Great.
Is there thoughts about working on the outreach?
Garth, earlier in the evening, it might have been while you were having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we were talking about the fact that if we create a formal subcommittee, it does around kind of community engagement. It creates some boundaries around open meeting law. But that if a smaller group of folks just got together and took it upon themselves to do a little bit of brainstorming and thinking about materials needed, I think some sites have already been batted around as possible places where we could do some community meetings. So Wisty, Susan, and Giannis were willing to do some of that work. I had actually said that I would like to jump in on that, but I guess we should also be aware that if there's too many of us, we start to form a quorum. But a quorum of this committee would be 5 people. So right now there's 4 people saying that they'll get together offline to just bat around this idea a little bit. Garth, if you wanted to jump in on that, I would happily step back and just put more time into thinking about the plan itself. So we could add your name to that list and it would still just be a non-quorum of interested people brainstorming some ideas, not deliberating.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
All right. So, Susan, yeah, you were going to send out that Zoom. So I guess if you could make a point of inviting Garth, you can leave me out of it, and I'll just hear at the next meeting or as this comes up, kind of what's needed, and can get some marching orders from there. But let's add Garth instead, and I'll focus more on the plan.
On the plan portion. Sounds good.
Great. So we will hear more later in the spring from the department heads and board chairs. Christian, maybe I can reach out to you and MJ to kind of just via email to talk more about that concern of just department heads. I just am a little afraid that we're going to get like multiple applications from various departments, and it's going to be our problem to organize Greenfield city departments. And there's got to be a way. So I'll get in touch with you and MJ and see like what does that look like in terms of how the city manages those department head and board chairs.
Yeah, send that email because MJ is pretty aware of all the dynamics and all that kind of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So
and there's so many dynamics. So yeah, that's not our problem.
I just wanted to
What
add.
what a fine dynamic city we live in.
And we're dynamic indeed. Yeah, Travis.
Just in regards to that, if there is like one person in the city who, or like an office that all the city departments should go through, then we should probably put that like on our application, like in a box that's like city departments only, like have you contacted, whoever it is that's coordinating it, and like they have to check yes that they did that, when they're submitting it. That way it's like a reminder to them, like, oh, make sure you contact this person so they know who's applying for what.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know that it's even about like policy or forced procedure or if we have the right to do that, but I could absolutely picture just us catching shit from people because other people submitted applications too and they didn't know and blah blah blah, and I just not here for it. So we'll tease that out a little, and I don't know that it is then kind of like if you're a municipal department, you have to have like gotten Roxanne's permission to apply for CPA funds. Like that's not what I'm trying to imply, but there's got to be some body that has some level of situational awareness of like, hey, 8 different departments are looking for this money to do these different things with CPA. Is that how the city wants to do this? I mean, there are department head meetings. So maybe even that. I don't know. I don't know. It's just something to kind of think about or be aware of. So this
I'm sure Christian can put the hammer down.
No
He'll be
doubt.
like, you no, you in, you out.
Yeah. Work it out, folks. So under other business, I had just thrown some of my questions around outreach and community meetings. But again, as we were talking about the timeline, it all just kind of morphed. And so I don't know that there's much else. I think the end was, does this effort merit a subcommittee? And the conclusion is subcommittee, no. But a non-quorum of interested members, yes. So we've got that. There's term renewals. Term renewals was on the agenda. And we talked about that already as well. So I rushed us through discussion earlier to ensure that we had time for everything. And now it's 6:48. And here we are.
I do have a list of.
I mean, either we're really efficient or there's unfinished business that we could flesh out a little bit more. I don't know, Susan, in terms of the application, do you have anything else that you want to be talking about? That's the piece that I kind of was like, do we have time to still talk about this? So we're here till 7, or we could be.
I guess the only thing is that broad and strong support category that we haven't really fleshed out. And I don't know if people want to think about it more or if folks want to think about how they would view that, or do we leave it out? I think there's something to be said for some recognition that it's not an individual coming in and that there's community support. On the other hand, that could be one of the more, just we ask for it in the application. It could be something that we don't score, but that we look at in discussion.
It's interesting.
So we could say, well, how many people are involved in this thing? How many people support it? What did they say? Because we do ask for, who is supporting you.
I think it's good to keep it in the numbering system because ideally that numbering system will help summarize what we're finding out in the application.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is so linked to the application, which is its strength, I think.
So would this ranking sheet be transparent in terms of the application? Would people be really clear of like, these are the ways that you're being preliminarily scored, if not final?
Yeah, we in Groton they put it into the application.
Because I guess that's, to me, it almost feels like if they just know that on some level we're looking at community support, like define it as is appropriate both for the community and for the nature of your project. But I guess I'm almost afraid that we could over define it in ways that then are kind of like, well, we're never going to be able to document support, like Garth was saying, like, well, we don't have this many signatures, but we have an entire advocacy group that endorsed it during a meeting. And is that community support? Or, people have called for this issue to be resolved in multiple forums and methods, and they're documenting those different things. Doesn't that show community support? I don't know. I guess I would be more inclined to almost like leave it open, as long as people know that it's kind of on them to show on some level. We engaged, and this is how we're considering this to have a level of community support. Again, the whole thing's a bit of an experiment, but I'm almost a little more inclined of like, you can tell us what your community support looks like versus we're going to tell you what your community support looks like.
Okay, now people, I see Garth saying yes, everybody else, well, Giannis, Travis, okay, then that's what we'll do. Cool, we're done.
Awesome.
I
And we
will,
still have 8 minutes.
I will make the updates and put that into the, the question about multiple priorities. I will put that in and it'll go into the system.
And as the person who brought that up, Susan, I would also be like that. To me, like that might be something that is a little bit more of like a bonus thing, as opposed to like, oh, your incredibly compelling housing request only addressed housing. Ding. You're marked down. Like that's not what I would be looking at, but it does also seem like this incredibly compelling housing thing also addresses open space and recreation in this really innovative way. Plus, right? So maybe it's a little bit more of a bonus system than a penalizing kind of thing, but it's an interesting way to look at the projects or the applications.
Good enough.
Christian, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, no, as long as this discussion is done, I do have one other thing. So I did get a few people already, department heads and the like, that have gotten back to me, and one of them does actually require some action from us. But the other ones, so the health department emailed us and said thank you. Parks and Rec, Christy Moore, the head of Parks and Rec, called me. We discussed the timeline. The school department, the superintendent emailed me, and I gave her just some more additional info about CPC. And then the Council on Aging, they emailed me and they asked if they could have someone or me from their committee speak at their next committee meeting. I don't know if you guys would be okay with me speaking, or if Mark, you wanted to be involved with that.
If it's a meeting that I could get to, I'd be happy to do it. I would also be happy for the two of us to do it. And if somebody else was really into it, like I don't feel like as chair it has to be me. But I feel like if no one else is willing or able, then as chair it has to be me. Do you already have the meeting date?
Yeah, I thought I had it written down, but I don't. They have a regular meeting date, so I can email you that once I find that.
Email me. Let's take a look at when that date is. If any of you were interested, if you're like excited by public speaking or presenting, or if you just kind of wanted to practice in terms of some community outreach for CPC, if you wanted to do it, get in touch with me and Christian, and we'll make the space to make that happen. But otherwise, between you and me, we can be sure that at least one, if not both of us, are there.
It looks like
Did you
they're
say that was
like
the-
Thursday in the afternoon.
Oh, it's during the workday, huh?
That was the January one, at least. It's like it was the 20th at 2. It's not on the February calendar yet, but it's probably a set.
This is the Council on Aging, correct? Is that what we said? It says on the webpage that it's on the 4th Thursday of the month at 2 p.m.
Oh, okay. So it's the same day. It's the same day as our CPC meetings. Well, again, I'm not seeing anybody kind of like, I'm dying to go present to the COA. So Kristen, you and I can work this out via email. And you'd probably be available by virtue of the fact that it'd be work, and I have some flexibility in terms of my work schedule. If I have some compelling work meeting, it might be tougher for me to get out of. So let's coordinate and see what we can do.
Sounds good.
Great. All right. Any unforeseen, unanticipated business? Okay. So the next meeting that we would be looking at is Thursday, February 24th, 5:30 to 7. I would assume that we would be meeting virtually unless things change. I don't know. Do people have thoughts on this? I mean, I don't know to what extent, like, we're
It
going
seems
to see
like
the situation.
we should assume WebEx for the time being.
Let's
Plus,
do,
it's
yeah,
February. It'll be a blizzard.
yeah. Christian, can we do that? Can we just plan on it being virtual and that you could work to kind of book the virtual space for us through the town's WebEx account? And I do look forward to meeting you all in person again at some point in the spring, though. I really value being in the same room, literal room together.
Sure.
So we'll do that when it's safe and appropriate, but let's plan at the February meeting that it will most likely be virtual again.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So between now and then, Kimberly and I will take a look at the plan and try to do what we can to flesh that out a little bit more. I will follow up as soon as I get feedback from Stu. I will incorporate that into that document and get that out for you all to look at. Wisty, let's bear in mind that kind of idea of some of the milestones and make note that some of those meetings should then have some debriefing of milestone activities and events. I think it's a really good point. So look for that from me. As soon as I get that uploaded to the drive, I'll notify Kristen. And for that subcommittee that's going to touch base offline, if there's anything that you need from me, just email. And otherwise, we'll talk again in February.
Good.
Cheers.
Good to see you all. Thanks so much for your time tonight.